All right, so this is the mystery of Roanoke. So, right here is the photo that's on the website. And for about 5 seconds, I want you to really take notice of some of the things here. We have this writing right here. It says Croatoan. We have some log and timber in the background. Maybe I'll be able to zoom in. I cannot. We have, all these fallen trees. It's kind of like this dirt. It looks like there's a fire going over here. We have some smoke. Think about what you think this story or this, and I'd like to remind you that this is nonfiction, and we know that nonfiction means that it is a true story. I want you to really take a look at this and think about what this could be about. And I will let you know that before we move on, we are not reading the entire story today. We are only reading part. So, the mystery of Roanoke. How could an entire village of people just disappear? 10-year-old Robert Ellis could hardly believe it. It was July 1587, and finally, Robert and his father were here. America! Back home in England, most people had only heard stories about this dazzling, unfamiliar land. The journey by ship across the ocean from England had taken 2 miserable months. Rats nipped at people's toes. Human waste sloshed around the bottom of the boat. If you dunked into the ocean for a bath, you might get bitten by a shark. This had actually happened to someone. But when Robert stepped on shore that warm day in 1587, memories of that nightmarish trip melted away. Stretched out before him was a place of unimaginable beauty. Golden beaches sloped into glittering water. Ooh, that was a rough sentence. Thick forests hummed with the sound of frogs. This was Roanoke, a tiny island off of what the English called Virginia. Today, it's part of North Carolina. Robert, his dad, and about 115 people had come here for an important mission to start a colony, a little piece of England in America. They would build a cozy village, set up farms, and gather treasures to send back home. Furs, fruit, spices, maybe even gold. But if Robert had known what would soon happen on Roanoke, he might have jumped right back on the ship and sailed home to England. Within 3 years, he and the other colonists would vanish from the face of the earth. So let's take a look. They're zoomed in on this map. All right, so this is one of those text features that we have to take a look at. Here's the map of the United States. It was not the United States yet. It was just this new land because we had learned about this in the colonies. They're still colonizing. The English are still sending people over to try and make the colonies, the 13 colonies. And they landed on this little island off of Virginia. So they're landing right about there. We created these maps to help you understand the location of Roanoke, but a real map from 1587 will look very different. Back then, America was not a country. There were no states. Native people spoke of places in their own language. In Europe, people had begun using the name America less than 100 years before. The name honors a man named Amerigo Vespucci. Vespucci, I'm not sure how to say that. An explorer from Italy. He was the first European to understand that North and South America were separate continents. So take a look, and you can see these big changes that happen. Take a look at all these. We don't live in homes like this anymore. Remember, we had learned about the Native American homes. They had the longhouse, which it looks like that's what's going on over there. We had, look at that, canoes, which we don't use anymore, or we only use for fun. The buffalo, wild animals roaming. You can see that there's a Spanish flag right there. Spain had conquered this area. Spain is no longer in control of America. We are our own country. So if you take a look, it looks very different from what it used to be. And we learned a little bit about what's going on up here. So we know this 10-year-old kid comes, and the journey was horrible. Just really horrible. He had rats nibbling at toes. There was human waste. And we talk about human waste. We're talking about, bathroom things being sloshed around at the bottom of the boat. So you're stepping in human waste. And if you went into the ocean for a bath, not even take a bath, because some of you have been on cruise ships or or have been on boats, there's like a bathroom in the boat. Nope, you would throw yourself in the ocean, and if you got bitten by a shark, it was kind of your problem. And then he gets to this place, so this horrible journey. Then he gets to this place, and there's these golden beaches, glittering water, thick forest, the sound of frogs. He went from this horrible place to now this really beautiful one to set up this colony, a little piece of England, to set up as the English in the United States and to trade. Remember, we learned about mercantilism, where they give these things to the motherland because that's kind of their job. And now we're finding out that they vanish, but we don't know how. So let's read on a little bit and find out. For a kid like Robert living in 1587, traveling to America was almost as thrilling and terrifying as the idea of flying to the moon. It was just 100 years earlier, people in Europe hadn't known North and South America even existed. It wasn't until the early 1500s that they found out. Amazing lands lie across the Atlantic Ocean. Few people have imagined the wonders of the New World, as they called it. Tree after tree stretched as far as the eye could see. Giant mountains seemed to touch the clouds. Wildflowers bloomed in bright colors. And the animals, buffaloes, beavers, grizzly bears, and salmon, and so many flying geese that they blocked out the sun. European countries like Spain, Portugal, France, and England were eager to seize the riches of the New World. Kings and queens sent explorers across the ocean: Christopher Columbus, John Cabot, Ferdinand Magellan. I'm not sure how to say that. Tales of their journey spread across Europe. So, we're learning another thing. These colonists, when the English were taking over, they had never seen all these animals before. There were more animals in the New World than there were in their own world, in England, which is not even a separate world. It's just they called it the New World. That was their name for it. But it wasn't really a new world. It was just another continent. So we're learning a little bit about that. We're finding out that this was really exciting. So for Robert, this kid who's probably about your age, he's 10 years old, is like basically going to the moon. Like, this is the craziest thing that he's ever seen. A better life. By the time Robert was born in the late 1500s, explorers weren't the only ones visiting America. Ordinary Europeans had started moving there to form colonies. These settlers built new towns while collecting, and sometimes stealing, natural treasures. Spain had already grown rich off of its many colonies, becoming the most powerful nation in the world. England decided to set up its own colony. At the time, London, England was crowded and filthy. Like thousands of others, Robert and his dad, Thomas, probably lived in a tiny, cramped home. Only very wealthy people owned land and roomy, comfortable houses. And if you weren't born rich, you had almost no chance of ever achieving those things. But if you joined England's colony, you could get at least 500 acres of land in America, an area 25 times the size of the Queen's Palace. To Robert and his dad, that would have seemed like something out of a dream. And so, the Ellises and about 115 others signed on to join the English colony. All were thrilled at the chance to start a better life in the New World. So I want to talk about acres. Acres is a measure of land. So not a single person here, not a single one of us in New York, lives on an acre of land. I can tell you that, or at least not in the city. Upstate, there's acres of land. You usually measure farms in acres. So think of how large a farm would have to be to feed people. So the farms that we get, our food from in New York City, they come from acres and acres of land. That's huge. Bigger than a castle, bigger than the palace, the Queen's castle. Acres of land is 500 acres is far bigger than that, 25 times the size. So imagine how much land they're getting. And they're coming from England, which is crowded and filthy. Thousands of people living in tiny, tiny cramped homes. What would you rather do? Live in a crowded, filthy area where you could never become rich? Or be given 500 acres of land to start new? Most of these settlers, they're otherwise known as like colonists. Settlers are the people that were first coming to the colonies to like start building the houses. Most of them, of course, most of the people in England wanted to choose a colony. They wanted to choose to go and pioneer and like and make a name for themselves by going somewhere that was not England, because England wasn't very nice at the time. Grave danger. But Robert would soon find out the New World wasn't actually new at all. The 500 acres that he and his father were promised, that land was not England's to give. It already belonged to other people. When the settlers arrived on Roanoke Island in 1587, some 7,000 Native American people were living in that area. Most belonged to tribes that were part of a big group known as the Algonquin. Members of the tribes had settled the area nearly 1,000 years before. The Algonquin called this land Assamokamuk. Assamokamuk? Something like that. I'm not sure. I don't want to say it wrong. At that time, millions of native peoples were living across America, members of hundreds of different tribes. Some have lived there for as long as 3,000 years. These lands had known the Mississippians, who built the Grand City filled with soaring pyramid-like structures in the Midwest. Then there were the ancestral, I can never say this word, Puebloans, who had lived in a castle-style building built into a mountain in today's Colorado. And there were the Inuit in Alaska, who glided through icy waters in sleek boats called kayaks. The Algonquin near Roanoke were expert hunters. They shot deer with swift, silent arrows and speared wriggling fish from the ocean. They were also brilliant farmers, growing corn, bean, and squash, which we know as the Three Sisters, by the way. During good harvest, they would hold big, joyful celebrations around crackling fire. But European settlers had pushed the Algonquin and other native people in grave danger. Thousands were killed in vicious fights over food, land, and natural riches. Thousands more died from diseases like measles, spread by the Europeans. So when Robert and others arrived on Roanoke, most Algonquin in the area were already distrustful of English people. Gathering huckleberries and acorns from the wood, an Algonquin girl might have spied the European building their new cottages. Her heart would likely have frozen in terror. She would have been worried that the new settlers would bring more misery and death to her people. Only one small tribe risked speaking to the newcomers, the Croatoan, who lived on the island of the same name, just south of Roanoke. So, we learned a little bit more. So, we have Robert, who was promised land with his father. So he and his father go, and England said, we'll give you this 500 acres. But little do they know, there's 7,000 people already living on that acre. So that's like me going over to one of your houses and saying, hey, listen, the principal told me that I could live here, so you guys have to leave. It doesn't work that way. It's not fair. The Native American people already had that land. That was already theirs that they were living on, and the Europeans had kicked them out. And there were a lot of different tribes. It wasn't just the Algonquin. There were many. So we're talking about the ones that are close to them are the Croatoan, who live on a separate island, and also the Algonquin. Those are the two closest. But there are far more who live in very different styles of houses, who use very different tools to survive. And they were very skilled, as we know from our last social studies unit, at living off the land. They held celebrations, they were very good at hunting and at growing new crops. And the Europeans put these people in danger. They essentially killed them for their food and land and whatever riches they thought they could send back to England, because that's what England wanted. And on top of that, they killed them with the diseases that they had never had before. Europeans had diseases like measles, which we still have today, but we have shots for it so that we don't get sick. But they didn't have shots back then, and there were no doctors. So the Native Americans were dying from these diseases that the Europeans had. So they get there, and if there was some Native American girl or a little Native American boy or maybe an adult looking over and seeing these people building their homes, cutting down wood, they would have likely been very afraid, and they would have thought to themselves, oh my gosh, I have to go and I have to tell my tribe because these people are definitely going to try and kill us. That's what they had known from these settlers. They just knew that they weren't good people and that, they didn't want the Native Americans there. So that's this part. We still have some more to go, and we're going to learn about the rest of it next social studies unit. So make sure to just do the work that I assigned in the Google Doc.